After being diagnosed with a terminal illness, my first thought was, what about my husband? The man who loves me so much. What will he do without me? But when I saw him being so gentle when he went out with other women, I realized belatedly that he will be fine. And I was the one being sentimental. I smiled sadly. That's good. The main text begins. I heard a noise. I was already sleeping uneasily. I opened my eyes dazedly. At the entrance, David was wearing a black overcoat. And by his feet was a suitcase. With the cold of the snowstorm outside, he was covered in dust. And his face showed the fatigue of his journey. I was in a daze. And looked at him fixedly. As I wondered if I had dreamed him again. A smile escaped him. "Honey. I'm home," he said. And came closer to hug me. But, mindful of his cold body, he quickly walked to the bedroom. And changed into some soft and comfortable loungewear. Before sitting on the sofa. And hugging me. And taking hold of my hands. Which were cold to the touch. "Honey. Why didn't you go to bed in the bedroom? Why are your hands so cold?" In front of me, David was always extra gentle. Like a beast with its claws removed. Exposing its soft belly for me to rub as I please. "Why did you come back early? Didn't you say you were coming back in 3 days? Yesterday. I saw you in the video in a bad mood. So I asked my assistant to book the tickets. Please. Director, first shoot my closing scene. Then rush back to be with you. Filming rushes. Working day and night. The hardships involved." He didn't say a word. He just kissed me. Bowing his head. And then looked me in the eye with tender, affectionate dark eyes. I was lost in thought for a moment. It was the same thing again. On the video call. I unconsciously muttered. I missed him. And he could finish his work. And then non-stop overnight cross provinces. To come back to see me in the snow and wind more than 1,000 kilometers. 10 years in love. Almost 5 years married. Similar absurd things. He has done countless for me. When I was a student, he fought with the rumor mongers for me. During the peak period, he made an official announcement. To give me a fair and square love. After he became famous, countless endorsement fees and film fees were all deposited into my account. He did so much to give me a sense of security. That he went above and beyond. Even his agent told me countless times with a hint of meaning in his smile. David is a complete lovehead. In the quiet living room, I was stunned. As I looked at the deep affection in his eyes that didn't seem fake. A sudden feeling of confusion and a sad sense of powerlessness welled up in my heart. The depth of his eyes was not fake. But the fact that he cheated on me with another actress in the industry was even more fake. Within a week. First, I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Then, my cat, whom I had adopted 7 years ago, died of old age. Loneliness and helplessness grew like a snowball. Until it finally crushed a nerve. And brought on a moment of suffocation and tears. That morning, I booked a ticket without thinking. And wanted to go find David. Who was filming in a different province. I didn't know what I could do by seeing him. But I still wanted to feel the warmth in his arms. Even if it was just the strength of a hug. The flight tickets were sold out. I bought the nearest high-speed train ticket. During the long 7-hour journey, I took a quick look back at my short life. The world has always been stingy with its love. There was so little that I had until the day I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. There were so few people who could not let go. After being diagnosed with a terminal illness, my first thought was, what will David do? How will I tell him? The man who loves me so much that he's crazy. What will he do without me? I thought a lot. About David's future. After all, I would soon have no future. After traveling more than 700 kilometers. And more than 7 hours on the high-speed railway. I arrived near the film crew in City C. It was already dark. When City C is often rained on at night. And pouring down. Unexpectedly. From head to toe. Blurring my vision. The rain in front of my eyes seemed to be impossible to wipe clean. And it made me feel close to breaking down. In the dark rainy night, the faint light from the car made the scene even more eye-catching. As the body swayed uncomfortably, Under the warm yellow light, the woman's original full bun at the back of her head gradually became loose and was about to fall apart at any time. During the intense movement, the woman struggled to kiss David. David grabbed her arm and hung it behind his neck, and then lowered his head and kissed her deeply. It seems he will get along very well. But I was being sentimental. I stumbled and turned around and smiled sadly. That's good. My body was cold and stiff from the cold wind. My eyes were dull and lifeless. It was as if all the strength in my body had been sucked out. I was left with nothing but numb skin. I recognized the woman. Her name was Jessica. She was a second-tier actress. Although she wasn't a big star, she was a good actress. She often stole the show as the supporting actress. And she had a good reputation online. She was clearly one of the actresses David had worked with the most. But I had never heard David mention her. It's as if she were just an insignificant partner. I mentioned her a few times, and David would look displeased and catch me in a flurry of kisses. That made me dizzy with love. Our time together should be spent without mentioning irrelevant people. But the object of our current lingering kisses is also that woman. In the entertainment world, a place full of handsome men and beautiful women, I have not been without worry that David might fall in love with someone else. With his extremely good looks and superb acting skills, the night David exploded onto the scene with a small role, I was both happy and apprehensive. Apprehensive that I wasn't good enough. Anxious that I wasn't pretty enough. But loving someone is like growing flowers. David always showed me his affection with practical actions. When he got his first pay as an extra, he rushed to the clothing store and spent all his money buying me a dress I had longed for. In front of the mirror, I laughed and cried, scolding him for spending money without discretion. But he just giggled and praised me for looking good, and even threatened that the dress was barely wearable, and that in the future he would definitely buy me more expensive, prettier clothes that would suit me better. Later, when he became famous, every time he went abroad to watch a show, he would buy me a bunch of clothes and bags from high-end brands. Apart from not officially announcing our relationship, in every other way, he spoiled me to the extreme. In the early morning airport, the scene from that unbearable time kept replaying in my mind. A bout of illness seized me. I curled up in the seat. Cold sweat drenched my face. I grabbed a passing staff member and gasped for help. Please, can you get me a cup of hot water? I swallowed a handful of pills with the hot water. The staff leaned over and asked in a gentle voice, "Are you okay?" "You're fine. You'll feel better in a moment." "Thank you." I tried my best to curve my pale lips. After a long time, the medicine finally kicked in. I dragged my tired and weak body, slowly got up, and gently tossed the crumpled disposable cup into the trash can. Something on my knuckles was thrown out with it. I was in a daze for a moment. And then I realized it was my wedding ring. After getting sick, my appetite has greatly diminished, and I often forget to eat. The ring, which had originally been the right size, had gradually grown a bit larger, and it often wobbled when placed on my ring finger, and was quite uncomfortable. I intently surveyed the trash can, and saw vomit from someone else spread across a large area. And the ring had also been stained quite a bit. After only hesitating for a few seconds, I turned around and left. Forget it. It's dirty. I'd rather not have it. The airport announcement reminded me. It was time to board the plane. With all the tiredness from the long journey, I returned home. I curled up on the sofa. But I wasn't sleepy. I don't know if it was because I was so lonely. All alone. Even though the heating was on full blast, I was still cold all over. In the past, every time David entered the set to film, Lemon the cat was there to keep me company. But one morning a few days ago, he went to my fingertips twitched, and I opened the phone album again. Before leaving, I spent more than 7 hours on the high-speed train. I found this 5-year-old video in advance, and watched it countless times. Over and over. Recalling the little sweetness in life. It was just a one-way trip. Within a day, I opened the video again, and my heart was no longer the same. This video was recorded by David and me. The night we collected our marriage certificate. On a whim. We cuddled together on the bed in our rented apartment. And said a lot of sweet things. To Jenny and David 5 years later. Hello. Jenny and David. Aged. Hello. Ahahaha no. Inexplicably a bit awkward, what's going on? I covered my face and laughed. David behind me took me in his arms. And kissed me a few times. I struggled to push him away. I cleared my throat. And said seriously. David. Who is so outstanding? Must have become a big star in the spotlight in 5 years. And David promised when he proposed yesterday. On the 10,000th day of my life. That is. Around the age of 18, I wonder if he has fulfilled his promise to go on a trip around the country. And include each other in his future plans. David never took his eyes off me. The whole time. Staring at me lovingly. Don't look at me. Look at the camera. I repeatedly reminded him to look at the camera. But to no avail. I glared at him in embarrassment. Hey. Show your wife your face in 5 years' time. Only then did he give the camera a pitying glance. His voice was clear and crisp. Hey. David. Who is 25 years old. You must love Jenny even more than you do now. David. Who is 25 years old. Looked me in the eye through the camera. The love in those delicate peach-colored eyes was shining brightly. No wonder many of his fans on the internet joked. David's affectionate eyes can make even a dog fall in love. I in the camera. Flushed with embarrassment. Mumbled. Has David matured at all in the 5 years since? I hope he's not still such a clingy, love-struck idiot. Hey. Do you two have any kids in 5 years? As we talked. I noticed that he kept staring straight at my lips. I was so distracted that I forgot what to say next. So I simply kissed him. And then bit him back in retaliation. I just pulled away. But he pulled me back into his arms forcefully. He tilted his head and kissed me deeply. The video ended reluctantly and hastily. At that time. We were both too young. And thought that 10,000 yuan was hard to earn. 10,000 days seemed like a long time away. But after all this time, there are already a bunch of zeros in my account. And I will finally usher in eternity. Years old. David. Who will soon be 27 years old. Do you remember? You said that on the 10,000th day of my life. You would take me all over the country. And then sail around the world. But there is number 10,000th day. I will not be 27 years old in the future. I have no future. I just want to live the next 4 months. More than a week ago. In the hospital clinic. I pretended to take a deep breath with ease. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose. And I smiled and said, Doctor. How long do I have to live? If you actively cooperate with treatment, there is still hope that you can live for 1 or 2 years. But if you don't have the conditions for treatment, you only have 4 months left at most. I see. Okay. Thank you. Doctor. I understand. The doctor seemed to sense that I had no intention of treating it. Sighing. He said. If it's a financial problem. The hospital has a related research project recently. Sign up as a volunteer and you can. I laughed lightly and shook my head. I got up and left. The video ended after 10 minutes. Maybe it had been too long since I had rested. My eyes were sore and swollen. I closed my eyes. And was about to press the phone to turn it off. When I received a call from David. Without waiting for me to react. My body, which had already gotten used to it, pressed the answer button first. It was a video call. On the other end of the line. He was in his hotel room. It seemed that he had just finished taking a shower. And his hair was still dripping. I should have reminded him to quickly blow dry his hair. To avoid catching a cold. His lips moved slightly. But I swallowed those words. David spoke up first out of concern. Honey. What's wrong? Your eyes are so red. Have you been crying? I lifted my hand and touched the corner of my eye. This time. With hindsight. I realized. That I had cried again while watching the video. As if I didn't feel any pain. I rubbed away the tear stains vigorously. The corners of my eyes were rubbed even redder. Seeing this, David's eyes were full of pain and anxiety. Honey, what's wrong with you? Say something. I pretended to be natural and smiled with a crooked mouth. I couldn't let him see the barely perceptible sneer in my eyes. It's nothing. It's just the physical tears brought on by a yawn. Oh right. Yesterday. I suddenly missed you very, very much. So I booked a ticket and went to see you. I dragged out the ending slowly and glanced at him in the corner of my eye to see his expression. Hearing this, he paused in the act of brushing his hair, and panic flashed in his eyes. But his tone remained unchanged. And he asked with a smile. And then, it turned out that I found out there were no more tickets. Sea City is so far away. It's so tiring to take the high-speed train. So tiring. For a moment, an unwilling question was about to escape my lips. But in the end it was stuck in my throat. David's Adam's apple moved slightly, with a slight curl at the corners of his lips. My dear. You don't know that during these days of filming, I miss you so much. If I had known, I would have secretly brought you to the film crew. I really want to carry you in my pocket wherever I go. I smiled meaningfully and asked in return, what would have happened if I had gone with you? It would have been nothing more than hiding in a hotel room all day and sneaking into a room in the middle of the night when no one was around, not waiting to cherish the moment of intimacy, and sneaking back to another room before dawn. This sneaky secret marriage lasted for more than 4 years. Upon hearing this, he also fell silent. On the first anniversary of their marriage, David was eager to make an announcement, saying that it was an anniversary gift. At that time, he was at the peak of his career, the only male star in the entertainment industry with a steady stream of fans, with tens of millions of female fans. His manager secretly approached me, because the only person who could stop David was me. He has always been willful and unruly, and only listens to me. Jenny, you know, the cake is only that big. Many people in the industry are hoping for David to fall and divide his resources and traffic. How hard it was for him to get to this day. You must know best. Once the official announcement. If the fans can't accept it, a large number of defections will backpedal. It will definitely be a heavy blow to his career. I lowered my eyes and listened quietly, fisted my palms, and went back to persuade him, stopping David's official announcement that would ruin his career. I don't know when. That love-struck brain that wanted an official announcement no matter what seemed to have disappeared. Every time the topic came to the couple's secret marriage, he would silently change the subject. Or after a long period of silence, he would look at me sincerely and say, I'm sorry. When did he only know how to say sorry? Just don't do anything to make me sorry, and everything will be fine. After the video call ended, I sat alone on the sofa. My thoughts were in a mess. I thought about a lot of things, but I didn't have a clue. As I thought, I fell asleep on the sofa in a daze. When I opened my eyes again, David was home, exhausted, standing in the entranceway, with a look of deep affection in his eyes as he gazed at me, who had just woken up. And my thoughts came back. I looked straight into his eyes, and suddenly said, David, are you busy next? If you're not busy, let's find some time to go through the divorce procedures. The words that I wanted to say were stuck in my throat. David frowned and thought for a moment. The next 2 days are the weekend. I don't have much to do. I can stay at home with you. Then I'll have to go back to the set. Without waiting for him to finish, I lowered my eyes and looked away. David cautiously assessed my expression and spoke tenderly and lovingly. My dear, is this what's upsetting you? I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I've been so busy that I haven't been able to spend much time with you. Can you wait 2 years for me? By then I'll have semi-retired, and I can spend more time with you. I smiled, but didn't say anything. My eyes were dull and lifeless. David, there won't be a time for that. I don't have 2 years in my future. The doctor said I only have 4 months to live. The first time I met David was in the summer of my first year of high school. Ever since I was little, my mother loved to beat me up. I can't remember what she liked to beat me up with. It was always the same things. Clothes hangers. Rolling pins. Brooms. My arms and legs were often covered in patches of bruises. In the summer, I couldn't hide them with my short-sleeved school uniform. The boy at my desk who had a crush on me confessed his love to me unexpectedly. She then took the lead and spread rumors about me. She said that the bruises on my body were all left behind by me fooling around with boys. The rumor spread like wildfire. The school bullies looked at me with increasingly explicit and lewd stares. When my mother found out, she came home and questioned me if I really fooled around with men. That was the first time I argued with her and refuted her. It was obvious that she had beaten those marks. She was so enraged that she kicked me to the ground and dragged me by my hair to the utility room. It was always like this when I was young. Whenever I spoke and made her unhappy, she would slap me and then locked in the dark utility room to reflect on my actions overnight. I still remember lying on the ground in severe pain, looking at the ceiling, until one evening, I was the class monitor, and there were not many people left when I left school. Just after I left the school gate, I turned a corner and was blocked by some bullies. It was David who was passing by and threw his school bag and picked up a stick to beat those up and threatened them severely. To me at that time, he was really a ray of light, bright as the moonlight, piercing the darkness. He taught me to love myself the most. He taught me to stand up to those who hurt me. He taught me to shatter those pale and powerless rumors. David taught me many things. He made me see the beauty of love. In the end, he taught me that words and actions are not the same. It was also him. This is probably his complicated heart. Before going to bed at night, I quietly close my eyes to fall asleep. But I can't ignore the burning gaze above my head. After holding back, I opened my eyes. I turned off the light and looked out the window at the faint moonlight. David's fingertips were tracing my eyebrows and eyes in midair. After I turned off the light, I closed my eyes for how long? And he stared at me for how long with patience. There was an unerasable depth of affection in his eyes. I said calmly, "Why aren't you sleeping? You keep staring at me." David's eyebrows rose slightly. And he teased, "My wife is really pretty. I can't get enough of looking at her." Moonlight shone into my eyes. My pupils glistened. His tone was as unrestrained as when he was young. He said, "Wife, I love you very much today too." I listened in silence, without commenting. After a short 2 days, David went back to acting. When I woke up, the bed sheet next to me was already cold. I got up and went barefoot to the living room. On the table was breakfast that David had prepared before leaving. It was very rich. In the chair where he always sat, there was a big bouquet of champagne roses, which were my favorite flowers, and whose language is eternal love. Now I just feel ironic. As usual, I have no appetite. A breakfast, cold and hot. I actually had 2 meals. Going through the motions, slowly swallowing the last mouthful of porridge. It's time to take my medicine. That's when I noticed that there were 3 bottles missing. I looked at the outside sky. It was already evening. Braving the cold wind, I went out to buy medicine. The pharmacy near the community had not yet resumed business, so I took a taxi to the big pharmacy in the city center. The new year is approaching. Along the way, there are lanterns and decorations. It's very lively. On the way back, the taxi driver was very enthusiastic and casually mentioned that there would be a firework display at the film and television base in the suburbs tonight. After this trip, he would be finished for the day and planned to go and watch. When I heard about the firework display, I was lost in thought for a moment. David had said before that he would take me to Warren Island to watch the firework display. He had written it in the travel plan himself. Looking out of the car window at the thousands of lights, I whispered, "Driver, let's go to the film and television base instead. I haven't seen a firework display either. I want to go and watch." The show was about to start. The crowds were surging. Even though it had snowed earlier that day, and it was very cold, it didn't dampen people's enthusiasm for the show. Just as their hopes for the coming year, the crowd all stared at the center of the flower trellis. And I was in the middle of it all. But I felt like an outsider. I couldn't take my eyes off the sight of the two people not far away, laughing and chatting. David was wearing a mask, but I couldn't hide the tenderness in his eyes. As he carefully arranged Jessica's scarf, to make sure she wasn't hurt by the cold. They looked like an ordinary couple. But I thought you said you were busy after the new year. Why are you spending time with another woman? Slowly, my fingers clenched the hem of my down jacket. I laughed to myself. I muttered to myself. I'm spending time with the person I want to spend time with. Why is everyone always free? It seemed like I was defending David. But in fact, I was convincing myself to pretend I didn't care. But inside, it felt like someone had stuck a thorn in my heart and casually thrown it into a jar of vinegar. It was now sour and astringent. Even my mouth was tingling with a bitter taste. For a moment, I thought with a little smile. When I really die, will David still be sad? That's quite a difficult question. After all, he is an actor. I suddenly remembered a long time ago, when he was just a nobody in the industry. He appeared in a movie. It was an opportunity he had fought hard for. His first movie role. Although it was just a small supporting role with 1 minute of screen time. The day the movie was released, he took me to the premiere with great excitement. Like a child who wants to be praised. At that time, he was still an unknown in the industry. I didn't have to worry about fans recognizing me and causing a scene. In the corner of the movie theater, the two of us could act like an ordinary couple and openly hold hands and watch his work. Probably because it was a movie he had acted in. I always remember the plot very clearly. I clearly remember that the female lead had a terminal illness, but hid her illness and set up the male lead with another girl who had a crush on him. After the movie was over, I was so moved by the beauty of the film that I cried my eyes out. The audience gradually left the theater. He continued to gently wipe away my tears and repeatedly comforted me with a gentle voice. It was only a movie. I sniffed. If I were to get an incurable disease one day, what do you think I would do? His gaze darkened. And he was very dissatisfied with the hypothesis I had proposed. I don't know what you would do. I only know that I would do everything in my power to die before you. Even if it meant going to the underworld together. And only I could protect you. His voice was confident and affectionate, and seemed to still be ringing in my ears. But love is ever-changing. I slowly blinked my eyes and recalled the words he had said at that time. And some sadness still lingered in my heart. I remember my reply at that time was, I think I would be like the heroine in the movie. And I would also hope that you find another lover and spend the rest of your life together. Ooh. Before I could finish speaking, he gave me a fierce kiss, willfully blocking the words he didn't want to hear. But why did it still hurt so much? It was clearly the result I wanted. I wanted him to be able to live a good life without me and find someone to love and spend the rest of his life with. It was just that there had been a deviation from the right path on the way to that result. But in the adult world, the result is always the most important thing. Isn't it? Just like that time in high school, when my grades dropped from first to fourth. My mother wouldn't care that. I had a fever of nearly 40 degrees on the day of the exam and was still struggling. Almost fainting. She would only give me a hard slap and ask me why I'm such a good-for-nothing after working so hard for me, and why I'm still not good enough. She was a very sad woman who gave birth to me, a girl, and damaged her body so she could never bear another child. She felt that her husband never came home because she hadn't given birth to a boy, and because she had given birth not only to a girl, but also to someone who wasn't good enough. She was always dissatisfied with me. No matter how well I did, it was never good enough. Because her husband still didn't come home. And even divorced her later. Slowly blinked her eyes. A cold liquid ran down her cheeks. Not far away, the iron flower maker held 2 flower rods. Runs shirtless under the flower trellis. And slams the lower rod against the upper rod. One rod after another. One person after another. A dozen masters move back and forth between the furnace and the flower trellis like swimming dragons. The molten iron raised high in the flower trellis meets the fresh willow branches on the trellis. And splatters. The fireworks and firecrackers hanging from the rafters exploded. And in an instant, the sparks fell like a waterfall. And the firecrackers sounded in unison, shaking the sky. I heard the sound of the explosions. And I came back to my senses. I looked up in a daze. And my vision became blurry. I saw the dazzling sparks of molten iron exploding in the night sky. It was so beautiful. Why was it so saddening? At the same time, Jessica heard the sound and pulled David around, pointing her index finger at the sky. The molten iron was hit and sent flying 10 meters into the air, which quickly turned into tiny particles, like scattered flowers in the sky. As the particles fly upwards or downwards, they quickly burn, cool and dissipate. David, who is turned with the woman next to him, raises his deep, dark eyes, and glances carelessly. But his pupils shrink, and he stares blankly at me against the dazzling backdrop of the sky. Perhaps I have lost weight again recently. I am wearing so many layers of clothes. But I still feel the cold wind from all directions seeping into my down jacket. I sucked in my red nose, and lowered my head to gather my collar, before pulling the zipper up to the top, and hiding the large, pointed half of my face inside, to soak up a little warmth. The next second, I slowly raised my eyes, and greedily wanted to see the blooming iron flowers one more time, but did not expect that I would be looking at him. Our eyes met, and I looked at the panic and astonishment in David's eyes. Behind my collar, I let out a sigh, and smiled bitterly. I thought I was going to die. So I didn't want to leave the story hanging in such a humiliating way. But I never imagined that things would turn out like this. I lowered my eyes and looked away, my expression indifferent as if I were looking at a stranger in the crowd. I turned around without looking back, and just wanted to get a taxi and get out of there. I pushed my way through the crowd. David quickly followed, trying to hold me back. I subconsciously fought back. The paper bag broke, and the medicine spilled all over the floor. Jenny, are you sick? Do you have a cold? I hurriedly crouched down to pick them up. David also crouched down to help pick up one of the bottles of medicine. After reading the name of the medicine, his movement paused. I snatched the medicine away from him, and got up to turn and leave. But he held my wrist tightly. David's other hand was trembling uncontrollably. He opened the mobile phone search engine, entered the name of the medicine, and relevant information popped up. The emotions of pain filled his dark eyes. In the brightly lit living room, the two of them sat facing each other. After learning of my illness, he was crying. But I tugged at the corners of my lips and smiled. Why are you crying? Isn't this a good thing? I pulled out a few tissues and handed them to him. Out of habit from all those years ago. He subconsciously leaned in, thinking I was going to wipe his tears away. I froze for a moment, and then let go of my fingertips. The tissues scattered on his lap. His movements froze, and his eyes darkened. Then he picked up the tissues, and slowly clenched his knuckles. My dear, let me explain. His voice was hoarse, and he was about to say something, when his phone suddenly rang. For just a moment, I could hear something special. In the past, David's phone only had two ringtone categories, mine and everyone else's. My ringtone was a love song he sang for me in college. Everyone else's was the default ringtone. And the intro to the current ringtone was obviously his new song. As soon as it was uploaded to the major music platforms, it became a hot topic among netizens. Because from writing the lyrics to composing the music and finally singing it, David did it all by himself. It was truly a labor of love. More importantly, from the romantic and sentimental lyrics to the lingering and entangled tones, it all shows that this is a love song. And to whom is the love song written? And to whom is it sung? The object is unknown. At this moment, the melody starts, and the object seems self-evident. Long, dense eyelashes hide the unknown emotions in my eyes. I notice that he is reaching for the receiver to hang up. I hurry and help by pressing answer. Some things are better to be short-lived than long-lasting. The soft young voice resounded in the overly silent living room. And the words revealed a palpable excitement. David, I have some good news. I was going to tell you after the show and go back to the hotel room to surprise you. But you suddenly had to leave. Well, I'm pregnant. I'm having your baby. David looked at me subconsciously. And panic flashed in his eyes. I slowly raised my eyes. And our gazes met. I smiled calmly. Congratulations. The person on the other end of the phone was still chirping and flirting. It seemed like they heard my voice. And suddenly stopped. The other person hesitated and said, David, is there someone else next to you? Someone else. I silently mouthed these words. And I didn't know when my eyes started to sting so much that I couldn't cry. It was just so unbearably sour. And it felt like a knife was stabbing my whole heart. David still hung up the phone. The living room fell back into silence. After a long while, a low, hoarse voice slowly sounded, full of remorse and self-blame. David explained that he and Jessica had just made a drunken mistake. Drunk. And mistook her for me. I laughed lowly. And felt only irony. He probably forgot it too. Men can't get hard when they're drunk. This sentence was still the science he taught me. At the time, when I was in college, his roommate had an affair after drinking. And his long-distance girlfriend found out. And made a scene at school. His roommate argued that he was drunk. And mistook someone else for his girlfriend. David told me this gossip in a mocking tone. And casually explained the saying. He then explained that he was actually on the set filming. And that the filming had just finished for the day. There was a firework display nearby. So the crew went to watch it together. I sneered and pulled my lips back. Smiling was even more unbecoming than crying. I was on the verge of a breakdown and thought. Why was he telling me all this? I'm sorry. It's disgusting. If that's the case, then quit this film crew. And don't contact her again. I sneered and said. I looked at him expressionlessly. He looked at me in a daze. His brow furrowed. His tone was difficult as he spoke. He declined the movie was a major production. It was expected to win awards. And win the Best Actor again. His furrowed brow suddenly relaxed. I laughed at myself. And didn't say anything else. In the following days, David postponed his scenes with the crew. And stayed at home. With the fine excuse of staying with me. In fact, we both knew. I didn't want him to stay with me. He said he would stay with me until the new year. That he loved me very much. That he loved me and only me. He kept talking to himself. Very loudly. Early in the morning on New Year's Eve, I stood in front of the French windows. And slid my finger across the screen. To find the long-lost number. I sent a lukewarm New Year's greeting. In a tone of voice so detached it sounded like a stranger's. Long before the courier service stopped running, I had sent her the New Year's goods. I suppose she didn't want to see me. After all, in her heart, my birth was the beginning of her misfortune in life. Fortunately, not long after, she no longer had to see me. That's good. I used to love spicy food. But David has a weak stomach. After getting together, I also tried to eat lighter. Paying special attention to less oil, less salt and less spice. But this time, I chose the spiciest beef fondue base. At the dinner table, the fondue pot was boiling. I methodically put the ingredients in. Suddenly, without looking up, I said, in a casual tone as if I were asking him if he wanted some beef, David, let's get a divorce. While I still can. He suddenly looked up. And glared at me. Silently rejecting me as if he were forcing me to take back what I had just said. Even his eyes were red with anger. I sat up straight. And nonchalantly picked up the hot tripe. The ingredients had been boiling for a long time. And suddenly I stuffed them into my mouth. A hot tear fell. He panicked. And leaned over to wipe away the tear with his hand. Before it even touched my face, he slapped it away with the back of his hand. Don't touch me. I didn't even give him a glance. I wiped it away with a strong, expressionless face. And slowly chewed the food in my mouth. Sure enough, it had been too long since I had eaten spicy food. I had degenerated. This soup base is really spicy. It's so spicy that tears keep falling. I can't wipe them away no matter how much I do. A few days after the new year, David should return to the film crew. The film crew has been waiting for him for days. Before leaving, he still couldn't help but repeatedly tell me to take care of myself. He went on and on like that, but never mentioned the divorce. Wife. Behave yourself at home. I'm already contacting authoritative doctors at foreign hospitals. Once I finish filming this movie, I'll cancel all my future engagements and spend time with you. We'll go to the best hospital in the world for treatment and find the best doctors. We'll definitely get well. We will definitely grow old together. I continued reading the comic without looking up. I pretended not to hear. Not long after, the harsh doorbell once again interrupted my reading. I thought David had left something behind. I got up impatiently to open the door. But I didn't expect it to be her uninvited. Jessica surveyed the living room wantonly. Her hand stroked her still flat belly. With a sense of bravado, I sat quietly and took a sip of water, waiting for her to speak. Her words were extremely harsh. I've done my research. You're David's secret wife. And you're going to die. I'm sure you know that I'm pregnant with David's child. After all, you were the one next to the phone that night. Your shrill voice was a bit harsh. Jenny, if you're going to die, why can't you just be quiet? These days, you keep pestering him, holding up his filming. Don't you think that just because you're going to die, David will feel guilty for you and leave me? You're threatening him with death to get him to change his mind. You are truly pitiful and despicable. I raised my hand and slapped her. It was a crisp, clear sound. Finally, there was silence. In a way, the two of them were quite a match. They were both equally loud. They both liked to talk to themselves. She glared at me menacingly. It was as if she couldn't believe that I had slapped her. I sneered coldly. Heh. I've been pestering him. A man who is soiled. Only you can't wait to take him for yourself. Jessica continued to rant in a rage. You're just a pathetic man on his deathbed. But me, and the baby inside me, are the ones who will be with David until the end. After she finished, she even raised her hand to hit me. But I caught it with my other hand. I poured the water I hadn't finished drinking all over her hideous face. Her face, which had been carefully made up, was now in a terrible state. I shook her hand off firmly and glared at her as she subconsciously tried to protect her stomach. I coldly threatened her. You said it yourself. I'm going to die. Do you think I'm afraid of anything else? If I were to kill you now, it would be fine. Right. After all, I'm not going to live for long. It would be worth it to take you and your bastard child down with me. Don't fucking mess with me. She was so scared that she took a few steps back in a hurry. She stared at me in horror. But the vicious plot hidden in her eyes was completely visible to me. After Jessica left, I felt a vague unease in my heart. I always felt that something big was about to happen. Suddenly, a hot current came from my nose. Then, warm blood gushed from my nose. I grabbed the toilet paper next to me and quickly stopped the nosebleed. In the blink of an eye, I suddenly laughed. As I said, I'm about to die. What's the big deal? During dinner time, a trending topic quietly climbed to the top of the entertainment section. Hashtag David, the young actor, is secretly married. Hashtag broke out. Hashtag digging deep into David's secretly married wife. Hashtag David's love affair. Hashtag holy cow. Ah, I've been dumped. No, how is this woman worthy of David? Is he hungry? Can he eat something good? Respect and understanding. But no blessings. The whole network is in an uproar. There are all kinds of comments. All the major marketing accounts are involved. Within 10 minutes, David's Weibo followers dropped by several 100,000. My fingertips paused on the hot search page. My brows furrowed slightly. I hesitated to open the contacts list. I looked steadily at David's number. The other person called first. Their tone was like they were taking credit. Wife. This matter was maliciously exposed. I didn't know anything about it beforehand. But I've already issued an official statement. So I might as well take this opportunity to tell everyone that you're the one in my heart. He actually took this opportunity to announce our relationship on Weibo, with a picture of our marriage certificate and a sweet photo from the past. Honey, don't be afraid. I'm here. I'll sort everything out. These few days. You should temporarily stay off the internet. Some people's words online may be a bit harsh. You don't need to care. I listened in silence. I looked down and saw the marketing account pushing the news about David and Jessica being caught on camera being intimate on the set. I closed my eyes. I raised my hand and hit the hang up button. On the evening of the 0th day of the month, I was walking back home, carrying a birthday cake in my hands. I tried to remember some happier things from the past, trying to make my heart feel lighter. It was the coldest winter night in the north, with the wind howling. I looked down and breathed out some hot air into my hands, and rubbed them together. I looked at the cake I had just received in my hands, and smiled lightly. Before I went out to pick up the cake I had ordered, I had already prepared a big table of food for myself at home, and was just waiting to pick up the cake, to enjoy the meal at a leisurely pace and catch up on my favorite show, while waiting for the 0 hour to arrive, and my age to come. I nodded quite contentedly, and hummed a song as I turned the corner. HPP. Birthed. HPP. Birthed. HPP. Birthed. To me. After turning the corner and walking a few dozen meters, I arrived at the residential area. As soon as I turned the corner, I almost bumped into a young girl, who I quickly apologized to with a smile. I looked up, but met her hateful and jealous eyes. I was stunned, and subconsciously took a half step back. But she grabbed my hand tightly. A sharp blade pierced my skin. The cake fell to the ground, one stab after another. Her eyes were full of insane hatred. I widened my eyes. Gradually I could no longer count the number of stabs I had received. I only remember that it hurt. I felt a little sad, and wanted to cry. I didn't want to die so soon. I hadn't yet celebrated my birthday, made a wish, or eaten cake. I shouted for help. The lights in the nearby community were on, but no one came to answer. I lay on the ground, in severe pain. I stared fixedly at the dark night sky. In a daze, I seemed to see the ceiling of the utility room again. It was just as dark. Death came quickly, but it was a hopeless and helpless process. Snowflakes falling in flurries, falling face up, and melting in a pool of blood. The cold wind sneaks in through the slightly loose collar of my down jacket. I'm so cold. I want to pull the collar tighter. As the blood drains away, my strength is gone. I have no strength to lift my hands, and no one can help me pull the collar tighter. I'm so cold. I'm in so much pain. My vision grows increasingly blurry. I can't even see the snowflakes. My faint cries for help eventually fade away in the winter snowstorm. On the set was clearly a closing scene of average difficulty. But David kept on getting it wrong. You have to know that in the difficult and important scene that won him the Best Actor award, he never made a mistake like that. He reshot it 10 more times before he got it right. Loosening Jessica's waist, David was out of character in an instant. His figure turned away with extreme indifference. His brow knitted. He was still a little distracted, but couldn't find the source. The assistant director shouted to let everyone know that the location of the closing banquet restaurant had been sent to the group in advance. Everyone should go there on time. Jessica made an excuse that her agent had taken the car. She asked in public if she could ride with David, since the whole crew was watching. David nodded and agreed. As David turned the steering wheel, a vague sense of unease grew in his heart. Jessica repeatedly spoke to him, but David ignored her. It even caused him to feel irritated. He had originally planned to attend the wrap party, and then pick Jenny up to take her to the restaurant where they had made a reservation to celebrate her birthday. The cake and roses he had prepared long ago were already back. Now he suddenly decided to drop Jessica off and leave, and go back to Jenny. They were both happy just sitting quietly together. At the intersection, the shrill sound of a police siren suddenly interrupted David's thoughts. The police car drove quickly past. He raised his hand and opened the window to let in some air. He looked up and watched the red light count down. On the sidewalk by the road came the exclamations and discussions of passers-by. Looking in this direction. It must be going to the residential area on the coastal road. Someone died there last night. I heard about it too. My second aunt lives there. I just posted a live video to the family group. There was blood everywhere in the snow. It was terrifying. Over a dozen stab wounds. The thing is, the murderer was a little girl. The girl who was killed was also quite young. I don't know what kind of grudge there was. TSK. I heard that the murderer seemed to be mentally unstable. David's mind was buzzing. For some reason, I was very panicked. My hands were faster than my mind. I picked up my phone and dialed the top number. With the note. Wife. A series of beeps sounded. But I couldn't get through. Hello. David. Ignored Jessica's voice to stop him. David opened the car door and got out. And snatched the phone from the old woman on the roadside. The sight of the bright blood caught his eye. His heart almost stopped for a beat. What made him most want to burst into tears was the face in the pool of blood. It was Jenny. It was his wife. The green light had long since turned on. The cars behind were honking their horns to hurry him. Beep. Beep beep. David suddenly came back to his senses. The air pressure around him fell to the bottom. He turned back to the car. And slammed the door. Rolled off. David. Rolled. Staring at the other person's obviously abnormal expression. Jessica frowned. And hesitated to get out of the car. His eyebrows and eyes were hidden in the black bangs in front of his forehead. It was unclear what the exact expression on his face was. He just kept stepping on the accelerator. Accelerating again and again. Exuding a crazy and urgent desperation. By the time David arrived, Jenny's body had already been taken away by the police and forensic doctor. The police officer who was left behind learned that he was the victim's husband. And briefly told him the situation. Mr. Lee. After investigation. Last night. Your wife picked up the cake. And met the murderer on the way home. The murderer has been arrested by the police. According to the investigation. She had a history of mental illness. A lot of information about you was also found on her phone. She was a big fan, obsessed with you. After seeing your official announcement of marriage. Her illness relapsed and she lost her mind. After the police finished talking. They left. David. Who was still in a daze. Was already in tears. The big star. Who looked so glamorous under the flashlights. Was crying bitterly in the security room. He begged the security guard to give him a copy of the community surveillance video. After returning home. He repeatedly watched the footage from the past few months. Over and over again. That few dozen-meter road. Jenny walked alone every time. She walked. And returned. Bloodshot eyes fixed on the screen. As if torturing himself. He watched the video of Jenny being killed hundreds of times. That night. She was alone. She went to pick up the birthday cake she had ordered. She was born in the 12th lunar month. And she will forever sleep in the cold winter. His Jenny. Couldn't even wait for her birthday at midnight. Forever on the eve of her 20th birthday. She was so beautiful. So young. So gentle and kind. Even now. David still feels like he's in a dream. He slaps himself many times. But still can't wake up from the dream. The restaurant called to say the cake was ready. David glances at it. And then slams the phone down hard. He carefully picks up the cake he picked up from the crime scene. Under the transparent wrapping. The cake. Which was originally exquisitely shaped. Has been smashed beyond recognition. The wrapping is also covered in blood. He stares for a few seconds. And slowly lowered his head. Licking away the blood stains on it. With his bare hands. He grabbed a chunk of the cake. And stuffed it into his mouth. Swallowing it in large gulps. Mixed with blood stains. And tears that had slipped out. If there had been a bystander at this moment. They would probably have felt that he had gone mad. First. His secret marriage was exposed. And then his secret wife was brutally murdered by a deranged illegitimate lover who had gone insane. The layers of the incident reversed rapidly. And the heated discussion fermented violently. The whole network was abuzz. all waiting for a response from David's studio. Late that night, David's account quietly and silently posted 2 videos. The first video was very long. Long enough for David to ramble on about the whole course of their relationship. Jenny was always kind. So kind that sometimes she would attract bullies. Like those high school bullies. Like me later. From their first encounter. When they saved each other. To their confession of mutual affection. Followed by the passionate love. And the warm everyday life after getting married in secret. David is not quite sober. And his speech is a bit disjointed. Sometimes he narrates the past. And sometimes he mumbles to himself. Before we got married, I clearly promised her that I would take her to see many beautiful sights. To the sea. To the ships. To the seagulls circling in the sky. To the winding mountains. When we had money, we would go see an even more beautiful world together. But I should be damned. I failed to keep my promise. I didn't take Jenny to eat the tea biscuits in the longevity village. I didn't take her to see the morning mist over the Jiangnan. The ridiculous thing is, until I recorded this video, talking about this memory, I only thought of it with hindsight. Saying, David, with a haggard face, stared at the camera, and smiled sadly. I clearly promised. How could I forget? She hated being left alone at home the most. She loved to travel the most. In the bright sunshine of the mountain stream. She had the most beautiful smile. It was supposed to be me. Why was it her? There is no longer a Jenny in this world. It was clearly recorded one after the other. In the second video, David seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. His eyes were vacant and numb. He retold the whole process of his infidelity word by word. Perhaps he had said too much in the first video. His voice in the second video was hoarse and unpleasant. The first time he cheated, he slept with Jessica. While filming The Morning and Evening of the World. That night, David confessed to his infidelity, which immediately set off a firestorm on the internet. That night, David suddenly confessed his infidelity. And the whole internet exploded. As expected, men will only be honest when they are hung on the wall. Sisters upstairs. There will be clouds and wind. Why do the bad guys always live better lives? The mouse that crossed the street and the cat that cheated on its partner suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and cursed themselves. Of course the most cursed is this scumbag. Sister is beautiful and kind-hearted, she will definitely go to heaven. I'm sorry. I deeply apologize for my previous words. I'm also sorry. Sister. I'm sorry. It really is a toad in a frog's skin. Dressed up in fancy clothes. My sister has really had it bad in her life with this pair of scumbag man and woman. I don't know which netizen was the first to take the lead. And call him Crazy King of Acting. For short. Crazy King. Eventually, throughout the entire network, Crazy King became synonymous with David. David's news once again broke into the public eye. Once again, it was on a piece of social news. A frequent visitor to the entertainment section's hot search. Nowadays, it is almost a permanent fixture of social news. The once glamorous movie star is now becoming more and more of a joke. The movie starring David and Jessica was being promoted. Jessica made a pitiful entrance. The main theme was a thick skin. Black and red is also red. The whole network and the audience at the scene all thought that David would not come. After all, he is the protagonist of the media storm. When David appeared on the scene, even the director could barely control his expression. A girl in the audience with a quick tongue directly cursed. Dead scumbag. Who still hasn't died. The scene suddenly fell eerily silent. David could hear it too. A strange smile appeared on his lips. The host tried hard to maintain the awkward situation and push the process forward. Before anyone could react, the 2 leading actors suddenly fell into chaos, which then spread to the entire audience. On stage, David's large hand firmly strangled Jessica's neck. Veins bulged on her neck. As she asked in a dark and foreboding voice, "You deliberately asked the paparazzi to expose Jenny and me. Didn't you? You also deliberately told that paparazzo where Jenny was. Didn't you? Jessica. I deserve to die. But you deserve to die even more." Jessica is on the verge of suffocating. Her eyes are starting to roll back in her head. Everyone else at the scene is trying to separate them and stop the situation from getting any worse. They are almost successful. David suddenly finds the strength to break free from the others and pushes Jessica to the ground with all his might. He continues to strangle her. Blood slowly flows from Jessica's thighs. The security guards tried every means to push their way through the crowd and rush over here. Just then, a middle-aged woman suddenly rushed out from the front row and stabbed herself with a sharp object. The woman's eyes were filled with unspeakable hatred. As David's pupils shrunk in pain, he let go and turned around to get a good look at her face and realized it was Jenny's mother, the woman who had filled Jenny's childhood with sorrow. The siren sounded again. And the law will punish all evil, wherever it goes, has finally come to an end. Fortunately, Jenny had already completely closed her eyes on that snowy night. Out of sight, out of mind.